All right, let's talk soft plastics. So I used to not be a huge fan of jigging for striped bass, and that was just specifically because I was stubborn and didn't like to jig for striped bass because I always thought it was not as fun as using like a big plug at night. I mean, I'm gonna kind of talk more about fishing at night. There's so many different places that soft plastics work, but I'm talking about catching really big, lazy summer bass specifically. I had some of the biggest success I've ever had fishing, and it was all due to fishing a new style of lure and a new style of fishing, which is jigging different types of soft plastics across the bottom. And I had a lot of success with the zinger baits, like bomba shads and everything like that. Those lures were really killing it, as well as the gravity tackle GT eels. So those were my favorite like soft plastics this year, and I had a tremendous amount of success fishing with them. And it's funny because there were literally a few things that I religiously throw at night for really big bass. One is live eels, and the other one is big metal lip swimmers. I'd never really thrown soft plastics, but I knew they were very productive. I had tons of friends, and they would always pester me and say, "You're missing out because we're killing them on soft plastics. What are you not throwing them for?" And so I finally threw a bunch in my bag, went out there, and sure enough, I started hammering fish. I caught I caught literally bass up to 38 pounds this summer on soft plastics, as well as countless of 20 to 25 pound fish on the GT eels and bomba shads and all those stuff. So I caught loads of bass, and the way that I loved to fish them is in really big current. I'd use like about 1.5 ounce kill shot jig head, and or about a half ounce. It was between a half ounce and 1.5 ounces. I would use depending on how big the waves were. We had a few days where there were some larger waves and I had to go heavy, but half ounce is probably more like what I use on average. Because soft plastics have a little bit of buoyancy to them depending on the soft plastic, you can kind of drift them in current and stuff, and that's what I was doing. I was using the big wave sweep, and I was kind of fishing them like a bucktail. So I would cast them up current into the waves. I would let it drift down current, and then once the bass were kind of hanging out in the current and the rip lines, once the plug would kind of drop down, generally I would get them on the drop. So I would just be bouncing off the bottom and I would be reeling. And what I would be doing is, depending on what the lure is, the GT eel is the same thing in my mind as like fishing one of those bomba shads. Just the bomba shads are like, I hope I'm saying the bomba shad right. I hope that's the actual name for it. But it's like the long, really skinny one with the very sensitive tail. It imparts a ton of action, looks extremely realistic, and so do the GT eels. And so what I would do is I would bounce them across the bottom and just reel them really slow. And it was just the profile that was presented in front of the bass. They could not resist hitting it, and it was working as well as live eels. They're so much easier to fish than live eels because you don't have to deal with live eels, and that is the most important thing. But the one main thing that I was doing that I thought was being ridiculously successful with them is not fearing getting deep and down into the rocks with them. Because if you lose a soft plastic, it's not like losing a metal lip. So I was not afraid to really get down into the boulders where those bass were feeding on crabs and little fish and eels and stuff that are in the rocks. That's what I was trying to do and try to kind of replicate with the soft plastics, was really bouncing them off the bottom. And I was hanging up every once in a while on the bottom, but I was also catching lots of really big bass when they were being super finicky and I could barely get them to eat anything else. I was really fishing them low and slow, and that was kind of the name of the game. Where when I was fishing like a GT eel, there's many different ways that people fish them. I've heard all sorts of different techniques that people use, but I was fishing in the same way as everything else. I was casting them up current. They sink a little faster because they're more long profile than like a really fat, lots of plastic condensed together. So what I would do is I'd cast them up and I'd have to reel them a little bit faster, but they have that crazy snaky action in the water that's just unbelievable. And what I was doing is I was just reeling them right above the boulders were right there. I was just drifting it right over the top of the boulders, and I was getting pounded. And they're pretty long, so one of those things that I was trying to do, because I was using just the little kill shot jig heads, which is just like a normal jig head, which the hook is not that far set back on it. What I was doing is I was letting him hit it. I would wait for like a pause for just a moment, like almost as if I was fishing a live eel with like a J hook, and then I was whacking the fish. And so I would just drift it along, boom, and then I'd hit it. And I would catch a lot of really like solid fish this summer doing that, and I've done that in estuaries as well with the GT eels, where I've just drifted them across rips on the bottom, and it's a really killer lure. And then those bomba shads, you can kind of really directly get them to drop and float, and you can get them to kind of hang out right in front of the fish a little longer. And I had one, the bigger bass, the 38 pounder I caught this summer. I casted up current, and first cast of the night, I get down to my spot, I walk down on the cliff, check my drag, flip my bail, grab my line off the line roller, cast out, hits the water, gain tension, let it drop, twitch once, let it drop, tick, little bass tapped it, and then wham, I hook set into this fish, and it was like, whoa, that fish pulled me forwards and almost off the rock, and it ran, and I'm like, holy shit, this is a legit fish. And it was running, got right up to the rock, and I was able to stop it right before it got to the rocks that were a little further out from where I was fishing in this like deep channel. And I was able to stop it and kind of turn this fish and get it up. And then it was diving pretty deep down, and it was getting in close, and there's kind of an overhang of these rocks, and I've been broken off many times getting the fish in close and then having them dive below this little reef like edge and cutting me off. So I was like, I got a kill shot jig, I can really put some pressure on this fish. So I reeled down and I really lifted him up with the rod, and it got it up out of the rock there, and it came up onto the surface. I was like, that's a real fish. And I grabbed him with the bugger grip, and I grabbed his belly, and I picked it up, and I was like, shit, that's a legit fish. And the bomba shad was all the way down in the back of its throat. It really choked it, which is just so awesome. And I had another scenario with a GT eel where I had like a 25 pound fish, so like maybe 43, 44 inch fish, and I grabbed the bass by the mouth when I was landing it, and the jig head was hooked through the lip and out the bottom of the lip, and I grabbed the fish by the lip, and it shook, and the jig head just went right into my finger. And this is a big hook, big like jig head, and now I'm attached to the fish. And so I walk this fish up, because I'm like, oh shoot, now I'm attached to the fish. Walk this fish up onto the rock, and I'm about to set it down, and the fish shakes and just rips its head out of my hand, like rips the hook out of my hand, and the head just fell out of my hand. The weight of the bass and it shaking just ripped the hook right out of my hand. And that was probably the worst I've ever been hooked. And it was, I still have a scar on my finger where he just drilled it right in. But that's my one warning. Yeah, it has one hook, but you got to make sure you know where that hook is in the mouth of the fish, because if it's hooked on the bottom of the lip there and through like the bottom and out the bottom of the lip, then there's a good chance you can get hooked if you try to just grab the fish by the face. Where most of the time they get hooked right in the roof of the mouth, and it's not an issue. That time it was hooked right in the lip, and I didn't know where it was. So after that, you can believe me, I checked every single time before I grabbed the fish by the mouth where that hook was hooked. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.